Chapter 9, Electricity. Jed and Baz were amazing. Amazing. They were so funny, and everyone was laughing and grinning and cheering at them. They do this thing on the show where you can get really big prizes just by winning a party game. One boy in Year 7 got an Xbox for coming first in a game of musical statues. It was mad. Normally I would have been straight down to the front to help them to get them to pick me, but I had to keep out of the way of any TV cameras in case I was spotted. Being seen would be an absolute disaster. Jed shouted into the microphone that the next game was going to be Pin the Tail on the Donkey. They brought out a great picture of a donkey, but it had Baz's face on it, and everyone cracked up laughing. "Guys, are you ready to win more prizes?" screamed Jed. Everyone roared, "Yes!" back at him, and put their arms up in the air, including me. I spotted Charlie Geek by the side of the stage. He had something on his face, and at first I thought he was wearing some weird fancy dress costume, but then I realised it was a great big plaster across his nose. He was jiggling around like he had a wasp in his pants, with his arms stretched up in the air. "This is going to be a tough one, Jed," said Baz, looking out at the sea of hands. "How are we going to decide who has the chance to win?" There was a drum roll. Jed and Baz put their arms around each other, then shouted, "A holiday to Florida!" Everyone went crazy as Jed and Baz suddenly jumped down off the stage and walked straight into the crowd. "Right, I'm going to go and pick our first contestant," said Baz. Everyone was screaming and waving their arms in his face, trying to get him to pick them. He turned around and Charlie Geek was standing right in front of him. "Nice nose wear," he said. I could see Charlie's eyes go all wide, and he pulled his stupid duck face, which must have been quite difficult to do with all those bandages on. Baz did his goofy face back and patted him on the shoulder. "You're the first contestant, my friend," he said, and everyone cheered. Charlie bounced up and down like he was on an invisible pogo stick, and then he made his way to the steps by the side of the stage. "How are you getting on, Jed?" shouted Baz across the hall. Jed was just a few metres away from me. The kids around him were pushing and shoving each other, begging to be picked. "I think I'm going to have to decide another way," he shouted into the microphone. "It's time for Picky Pointer!" The crowd jumped up and down and clapped as he began to spin round and round and round, faster and faster, with his finger pointing outwards. He did this on every show, and sometimes he went so fast he fell over. After a few turns, he began to slow down. "I think I'll choose you," he said. He stopped spinning and pointed his finger straight at me. I looked up. My arm was still in the air. There was a general gasp from the audience as I stood there, my mouth dangling open. "Come on now, don't be shy. You want to win a holiday, don't you?" said Jed. Behind him was a woman with a camera on her shoulder, and she was pointing it directly at me. I was going to be on TV. I opened my mouth to say something when all of a sudden Mrs. Lloyd pushed her way through the crowd. No, stop filming, she said. "He's not supposed to be here." She stood in front of me with her hands on her hips. Jez looked up at her and then at me, and then swiped his hand across his throat and cut the music out. Mr. Howard appeared beside him. His bow tie wasn't spinning anymore. "Maxwell, get yourself home," he said through gritted teeth. "Don't make a scene." The camera woman turned towards him. She was still filming. The hall was silent now, and all you could hear was the hum of the lights. I stayed exactly where I was and folded my arms. "You can't make me," I said. Jed snorted and I grinned at him, but he just scowled back. Mrs. Lloyd stepped towards me. "Maxwell Beckett, you need to leave the hall immediately," she said under her breath. The camera moved around to film her, but she tried to move out of the way. "I'm not going anywhere," I bellowed. A woman with a clipboard came over to Jed. "I think we need to take a few minutes to sort this out. Okay, Jed?" she said to him. He rolled his eyes and gave a massive huff. Baz appeared beside him. "What's going on? Are we doing this thing or not? Who's this dude?" he said, nodding towards me and looking at me like I was a piece of dirt on the floor. I could feel my eyes stinging as everyone stared. Behind the crowd, I could see Charlie standing on the stage beside the donkey picture. He was shaking his head at me. "Maxwell, you're making a spectacle of yourself. Now be a sensible boy and go home," Mrs. Lloyd said sternly. Mr. Howard looked at me sadly. He was about to say something to Mrs. Lloyd when Jed pushed by him. "Hey man," he said, "I don't know what you've done, but you're kind of ruining this for me and Baz here." I stared back at him. I couldn't believe it. Jed hated me. Baz appeared beside him. "Jed's right," he said. "It's time for you to get out of here, don't you think?" I stared at them as Jed put his hand on Baz's shoulder. They both glared at me. You're rubbish anyway," I shouted. There was a huge gasp, and then I turned and pushed my way through the crowd and out of the hall. "Maxwell, wait!" called Mr. Howard. But I was gone. I was so out of there. "Okay, guys, let's get this party started," screamed Baz into his microphone, and the crowd gave a unanimous whoop. I got back to the corridor and dived into the danger of death boiler room, locking the door behind me. Someone started pounding on it from the other side. "Maxwell, I know you're not allowed in there. Now open the door and let's have a chat, shall we?" It was Mr. Howard. I stared around the little room, my eyes wet with tears. He banged again. "Come on, Maxwell, I'm sure we can have a word with Mrs. Lloyd," he said. "I'll see if we can get you to stay. How about that?" "Go away," I shouted. There was no way I'd go back into that hall, even if she did say yes. I made my way past the mops and brushes towards the fuse boxes and electrics. I looked up. I knew exactly what I was looking for, and I spotted it straight away. A bright red switch with one word painted underneath it. Main. I upturned the metal bucket, stood on top, and then reached up and held the big switch between my thumb and forefinger. "Everything's gone wrong," I whispered, and then, click, I flicked the switch. The music from the hall instantly died, along with the light bulb above my head. I got down off the bucket and felt my way along the wall until I got to the door that led outside. I went out and locked it behind me, putting the key in my pocket. And then I ran. I ran as fast as I could from the worst day of my life.